Why hello there, and welcome to Beyond the Lane, a Esports presentation, your weekly home for League of Legends pro scene news, discussion, debate, and diatribes from me, your host, Jared Wynn, but more so than me, really, my co-host, the wonderful YamatoCannon. Yamato, how are you this fine evening?
Pretty good. I didn't eat yet, and it's pretty cold. I don't have any socks. They're all in the thing that you clean the socks in. I can't find the word for some reason, and that is my evening pretty much.
Well, thank God we're here for you to help improve your evening with
thank you, Jared.
Some league talk. I know, hey, that's what I'm here for. That's what we are all here for, is to make things better for you. Speaking of making things better for you, I don't know if this is really a good segue. TSM is 2-0. Does that make things better for you? Well, 2-0.
Yes. TSM.
I mean, they played pretty well, actually. They haven't done too bad. Team solo mid with Biofrost now in tow, looking pretty solid. Did you expect, Jacob, this team to be on top of the table?
Well, I definitely thought they would be a contender. Like, based off of the previous split, I think it's very normal to say that you expect COG to come out on top, but with that in mind, COG have taken some kind of a break period or whatever we want to call it. I think we can talk about that a bit later, but with the focus on TSM, I think the consistency that has come with the meta shift is the fact that there is a lot of focus around the top lane, around the mid lane. And I feel like the main strength of TSM right now is the fact that they have this solid force of consistency from Hanser and from Bjergsen. I don't see any games where they perform poorly. They always perform to very, very high standards, and they do it consistently, which allows, then again, the bot lane to kind of do their own thing where they, like, I think the bot lane is the weakness because they only play one way, but they're allowed to do so because of the consistency in mid and top. And with that in mind, if you have three lanes that can play aggressively and play strong, it allows the jungler to do whatever he wants. And I feel like for the first time, all the players seem very, very comfortable in the role. I think Bjergsen is starting to show up more and more. Hanser is taking a massive role as well because of the top lane meta shift and always plays consistently. And then, like, when I think of TSM, I feel like the one glaring weakness is the fact the bot lane can only play one way. In their draft, they draft Lucian, even after the nerfs, they draft him all the time. And Lucian speaks to me as you need to win lane or lose game, because there are a lot of AD carries that outscale him very, very hard nowadays. The Caitlyn, the Ashe, the Sivir, they outscale him pretty hefty. And with that in mind, I feel like there's going to be a problem in the future of TSM where the meta shifts towards this top lane centric as it always will be, and it's starting to become with the Aurelia, etc. What will happen when they can't play around their bot lane? What will happen when this bot lane that is so aggressive has to play defensive? I think that is going to be a glaring weakness.
We've seen Doublelift in the past do some switching things up. I think he's played some Ashe even, which is not exactly his typical sort of champion, more of a support ADC, if you will. Do you think we'll see him shift his role again, or do you think they're kind of hard-coded now, Doublelift and Biofrost, in this lineup to play this one way and it won't change? Kind of like Huni doesn't really change to a tank meta, even if the meta demands it.
I feel like definitely that Doublelift has shown that he can play a lot of variety of things, but the question is what will happen if they are finally put in matchups that are weaker. Let's say they, for example, play a Caitlyn and a Braum into an Ashe and, for example, a Zyra. Then all of a sudden you have this weaker matchup. You need to play defensive and patiently wait on your team to be proactive and transition pressure from the other side of the map. When this doesn't happen, I can imagine, and I imagine it very clearly in my mind, that the bot lane of TSM is going to struggle. Because, it feels like Doublelift only has one gear. I'm not too sure about Biofrost because, of course, he needs to play accordingly to his AD carry, but Doublelift has shown in the split that he has only one gear. And with that in mind, there's been team fights where Doublelift has showcased this, where he just ease in and he doesn't know how to put in the reverse gear and just back off a bit. And I think this is going to be a problem in the future.
That has been a criticism of Doublelift for some time now, as his struggling in team fights, perhaps struggling to fit his style into a team fight style while he does well in lane. You did mention the consistency of Hanser and Bjergsen. I want to ask you, is Hanser as good a top laner as exists in North America today?
Well, I think luckily for North America, something that has been very weak for them for a long time is the top lane pool. And I think when I think of all the top laners in North America, I think like the 4 top ones has to be, Hanser is definitely up there. I can imagine him being the best. But then you need to keep in mind that Impact is there, Huni is there and Seraph is there. 3 Koreans, sure, but the idea is that, you know, they bring... basically, so far, it's kind of hard to compare them because I feel like they bring the same level of consistency. I think what Hanser has going for him, his level of consistency is higher than the others, but I feel like when Huni and Impact play at their highest level, I think they are slightly above Hanser.
I noticed you didn't mention one person, Darshan, who has played at a very high level at times. You don't feel him consistently at that level, or what?
Well, based off of this split alone,
right,
I am not too satisfied with Darshan's performance. I think the one game that sticks out in my mind is the game he played Swain against Team Liquid. He played Swain into Aurelia. You could say that that's a draft mistake because I don't think Swain is too good into Aurelia because it's so easy to just set up ganks with the Aurelia because as the moment you harass her, she can set up the stun very easily, and Swain is all about that harassment. So you could argue that the matchup is bad, but overall, like, Darshan, you know, he does the Jax thing, works out for him. He does the split push thing. That is always a Darshan thing. But the fact that, you know, COG is struggling, I can't really give him that credit just yet.
Yeah, you mentioned CLG struggling. We'll get right into that right now. I think some CLG fans would say, well, it's a patch lag thing. You know, they had this big performance at MSI. Now they're kind of having to catch up to things in the meta. They're getting there. They're going to make it. It's going to be fine in the future. The fans would say that. As a more neutral observer, what would you say about CLG? What to them is so off that they could go and get second place at MSI, look very impressive doing so, second in the group stage, beat Flash Wolves solidly in the semifinals, and then come to North America and really struggle to even get one win thus far?
Well, I think it's kind of fair to say, sure, they took a break after the fact, and also their field of opposition these 2 weeks has been stacked. I don't think it could have been any worse. And I think it's a bit unfair to jump to conclusions right away because I think there is problems with the draft. We saw a bunch of Graves, we saw the Swain top versus Aurelia that I mentioned earlier, and very weak map play overall. Like they don't really respect ganks. And I think when it comes to the idea of how they're supposed to close out a game, and for example, if they have a split push threat, they play to that strength. And this is like the strength of CLG that I always see. They know how to play to their own win conditions. And I still see that. But the big issue for me is the fact that mechanically, I think a lot of mistakes are happening. I think Huhi is playing very poorly, losing matchups which he's supposed to win. Remember specifically the Swain versus the Vladimir. Luckily, they won that game, but that was for other reasons. But Swain should come out ahead in this matchup. And then, of course, the struggles of Darshan, where he just doesn't know how to kind of cope with ganks in general.
Now, what brought those struggles on? Because, again, Darshan has at times proven himself to be a great player, like a top-tier, top laner in North America, and even an internationally capable top laner at MSI. What has hurt him? Is it the meta? Is it just something different? Like, what do you see there that's different for him personally?
Oh, you know, like when he's put into matchups that he's familiar with and matchups that are in the current meta better in his favor, then he's doing fine. Jackson to Maokai, he does fine. And the other times, he's put into matchups which I don't completely agree with. I remember him picking Fiora the first week, and I think Fiora is completely outdated and should not be played at all. So I think the biggest problem I have with CLG is the fact that they never really left MSI in terms of pick and ban. Still see a Graves, we still see some Fiora, but I feel like the adaptation is getting there. You know, finally see a Jax. Jax is getting some buffs. Trinity Force, his passive got buffed. Okay, this is a more relevant champion than Fiora is. And Swain into Aurelia, I don't think this is ever going to happen again. And with that in mind, I feel like the good times of CLG is going to come eventually. The bot lane is still doing fine, except when they play against C9, but I guess we'll go into that later. But I still feel like the good times are going to come. The real question for me is, you know, I have faith in Darshan. I don't have faith in Huhi. I don't feel like he's going to bounce back the same way, because to me, he's always been a weakness in COG.
You mentioned the bot lane against Cloud9. First of all, I want to comment actually that you mentioned the lag of the draft from MSI. I guess that does go in line with a fan theory for CLG fans. So if you're a CLG fan, you're thinking, hey, just the draft hangover thing, don't worry about it. You know, Yamato has your back. He actually agrees with you potentially. Cloud9 did outplay CLG. One of CLG's losses coming to that team. C9 looking pretty good. They've got this bottom lane mix up though, the support role. Where do you see that ending up? Bunny Fufu, Smoothie, is one looking better than the other to you?
I think Bunny Fufu is clearly the better support. I don't understand why they want to change it up. I think the true test was when Bunny Fufu and Sneaky played against Stixxay and Afromo and completely demolished them. It was, like when I say complete demolished, it was in very tense scenarios where things are supposed to be close. They ended up ahead convincingly in these fights. I think rewatching the C9 COG game is a perfect example of what Bunny Fufu and Sneaky can do together. Smoothie, on the other hand, I don't think, I'm not too convinced. He's fine, but I just think Bunny Fufu, especially on his trash, is just a way more convincing support to me, because bot lane, how you lane is just so important, and Bunny Fufu does that amazingly well.
Why do you think it is? And obviously you don't have insight here into the Cloud9 strategy session, but why is it with Bunny Fufu playing well, they want to bring Smoothie in when it seems like Bunny would do well to have the more game time now that High is no longer competing with him for game time in the support role?
I think it's a question of trying out as many options at once as possible. I think as we proceed on and the LCS is going to be bigger and teams invest more into their teams and the structure behind teams is going to be greater and greater, I think a lot of these scenarios are going to appear where you give a young talent a chance to kind of show himself and kind of let him grow within the team, and this is how talent is going to be developed in the end. And I think as we proceed, roster is going to be bigger and people are going to take more chances, because for what all we knew, maybe Smoothie was some kind of god that would have dominated everything. There was a possibility of that. And I think it's understandable that you kind of widen your horizon and look at your options and try as many options as possible, especially this early on in a split.
Cloud9, of course, had some big roster changes going into the split. They were a big story for that reason. You've seen now Impact and Meteos with the team. Impact new to the scene in Cloud9. Meteos returning to Cloud9 after a little sojourn elsewhere in the Challenger Series. What have you thought about each of these guys individually? What have you thought about Impact and Meteos in the first 2 weeks?
I think Impact definitely up there with the best in terms of top laners in North America. I think what impresses me the most about Impact is his well-roundedness. I think he is able to play in a way where he has a good matchup. He's supposed to play aggressively and punish the enemy top laner, does it very, very well. And in the matchups where he's weaker, he tends to go very, very even. I think a game that rings a specific bell in my mind is playing Chondu against Swain. In the end, in this specific game, I don't remember which one it was, but he was getting ganked over and over by a Rek'Sai. And getting ganked by Rek'Sai and Swain at the same time as Trundle is a very grim situation. And with that in mind, it showed to me that he is capable of playing both ways. The trait I'm lacking in, for example, Doublelift, he can only play aggressive. He can play both ways. When he's getting pressured, he understands how to handle it. When he needs to pressure, he understands how to handle it. So I think Impact, good player, very well-rounded. I like him a lot. Meteos, on the other hand, there was this first week where C9 as a whole kind of struggled mechanically and did a bunch of random crap. I think Jensen was there too, but Jensen is starting to shape up. But Meteos, on the other hand, I don't know. He's doing fine in terms of where to be on the map and where to pressure on the map. But sometimes I just see Gragas battles flying in random directions, which I'm trying to kind of fathom, like fathom? Is it fathom?
Fathom, you got it. Fathom the first time you got it.
Yes.
Yeah, you got it.
I'm trying to understand what he was thinking when he threw this Gragas battle, and I just come out blank because it just makes no sense. So mechanically, Meteos has been very unimpressive for me.
But his game sense has been there, just the mechanics are missing.
It's been there. I don't think it's been challenged properly yet.
Okay.
I think it's been good enough because C9's map play and map rotation has shown, they've finally shown some prowess without High.
Do you think he can shake that off? He can shake some mechanical rust off still? Or is it more a matter of he's just, he's worn a bit as a player?
Well, it's hard for me to say because in the past, the level he's at now in the past was fine, but the overall pool and the overall mechanical strength of everyone has gone through the roof.
Right.
And I don't think at this point, every team is stacked with mechanical prowess and everyone has mechanical players. I think at this point in time, it's going to be very hard to compete as an older player. So I can't see it improving drastically.
How about Team Liquid finally having some limited success? They had to bring out the Rengar, which is, triggering players all over the world, I'm sure, and solo queue. This team has looked good on paper, but they've had some jungle issues. Bringing Dardoch in for Moon, looking better there. Dardoch is, of course, playing the Rengar. Do you think this is a long-term, like a playoff team, or are they kind of looking a little bit sticky to you, looking like they might struggle through the split?
I think Team Liquid, their laners are very, very unimpressive to me. I think without Dardoch doing anything at all, nothing happens on the map. There is no advantage to be gained, and I think overall it just seems so uncreative, their laners in general. I think Dardoch is the shining light of this team. When he's pressuring a lane, it shows, and when the rest of the players on the team get an advantage through Dardoch, things happen. But, we were talking about CLG's draft and how outdated it is. Looking at Team Liquid, it's even worse. They put Dardoch on Graves. Graves is a jungler that cannot pressure lanes rather well. The only way he can pressure the map is through invading if his lanes are pushing. And that doesn't really fit into Dardoch's playstyle at all. He wants to gank heavily and gain advantages through that. And also, they tend to go for the Lucian, which works for TSM, but it didn't work at all for Team Liquid because their lane prowess is very, very weak. And I think Lucian in the current patch and the current state is a much weaker champion. And I think playing Lucian into a Caitlyn, like a player that is known for his Caitlyn, at this point in time when Lucian, the Q range is nerfed and trading is very, very, very hard to do as Lucian against Caitlyn, I think that was very, very silly. And I think even though COG's draft was outdated, it wasn't as outdated as Team Liquid's draft.
You mentioned the Liquid laners not impressing you too much. Piglet has been a big area of discussion since he came into Team Liquid. He's been in some controversy. He's had places where he's played very well and places where he's perhaps struggled a bit. Obviously been very emotionally affected at times by those struggles with Team Liquid. He's been seen on the stage getting emotional. Do you see Piglet as a long-term success possibility for Team Liquid? Like, can this really work for the team, or is he more of just, he's going to be this good mechanical player who can never quite make it work with this team in North America?
Oh, I think Piglet definitely has had moments where he has done very, very well, where he has single-handedly done more than everyone else together on his team. And I think Piglet as a player is still one of the better AD carries in North America for sure. I think it's harder to judge because, these bot lanes as a whole, for example, Stixxay and Afromo, this is a very, very hard bot lane to play against. And I think Matt has been rather unimpressive. His champion pool also unimpressive, still goes to that Braum, ends up in counter matchups. It's very, very hard to see or hard to notice if Piglet is doing bad or good because Team Liquid tend to collapse very, very early on in the game.
Well, we'll see perhaps with more games to show if Piglet can improve his performance, if he can carry the team, as an AD carry sometimes should, or if he goes down with the ship. Now, a couple of highlights from the from the second week of the LCS North America we're going to show here. First, TSM versus Immortals. You mentioned Yamato Doublelift getting a little too aggro in his playstyle at times. I think we're going to see actually a case of Doublelift getting too aggro and it affecting TSM negatively as Immortals take advantage of him.
So this one is quite hilarious. It's very, very important that Lucian survives with the team composition that TSM has because Zilean, even though he has some burst to provide, they don't really have any consistent DPS on this team. The build of Swain is very, very tanky. And of course, I think the Zilean ulti is going to be eventually used on Rek'Sai. And after the Zilean ult is used, Doublelift decides to do this heroic play where he walks into 4 people and gets one-shotted. And with that in mind, you can see some of the players on IMT, they have very low HP and it looks like a favorable fight for TSM. But in reality, Zilean, his bombs don't provide enough DPS to cut through all this health that IMT still has. And then on the other hand, you have a Victor that, of course, at this stage in the game, 40 minutes into the game, a Victor is going to do a shit ton of damage if he survives for this long. So Lucian dying this early on in a fight is completely horrible and unacceptable with the Zilean comp.
We've talked before, you and I, about how players have some math they do in their head when they look at health bars and tower health bars and try to figure out, okay, when can I go in here, what damage needs to be done. Doublelift's played a lot of games, obviously. Is this a case of just his math being off, or is he getting just too aggressive in the moment? Like, how does this kind of thing happen?
I think he just forgot his calculator at home or something, you know. This was, I don't think there was any thought process at all involved in this. This was just, I want to Ian and
just go.
Unlucky, yeah.
Go
just
in.
one gear, you know, push the gas and just. Psh,
yeah, eighth or ninth gear or so when he actually breaks the metal. Yeah, that seems to be the case. Going over now to Cloud9 versus, I believe, CLG. You mentioned Jensen coming into form with his mechanics. We're going to see here Jensen initiating successfully with those mechanics in form against CLG, making Controversies Gaming a little less happy in week 2.
So this clip is hilarious to me because the first thing that I noticed, you know, that I want you guys to pay attention to is the Meteor's Gragas ultimate. What does the Gragas ultimate actually accomplish? Nothing. I think he tried to hit the pillar and went for some points or something, I don't know. But the highlight is, of course, you know, he's finally coming into shape with his mechanics. He's doing a wonderful engage here that kind of denies Victor of doing anything in this fight. Sure, he gets his ultimate off, but you want to kind of follow people with it. And Jensen, of course, survives after the engage, which allows them to put out a lot of DPS and, of course, CUG to overcommit to get to him. And this, all in all, is a very good engage from Jensen. And this is the Jensen we are used to see. Not the one we saw in the first week where he kind of slips up here and there, but, you know, this is the Jensen we want to see.
I think you may be onto something that Meteos was really going too seriously for the skill shot there. Like, look, guys, I can hit that pillar back there. Just watch this. I can hit it for sure. No problem. Might want to hit the opponents, I guess, given that's a LCS game. But you know, they still won the fight, so it's all good, right? He was psyching them out. You know.
He thought we wouldn't notice.
We did. No, we noticed everything here. We are beyond the lane here. We notice all ultimates, even Meteos' terrible Gragas ults. Yeah. Switching over now to Europe, to the EU scene, we have one team really standing out here, and not in a good way. Origin is looking shaky, and they've shaken off their ADC. Forgiven has split. You and I discussed Forgiven's time with Origin. We joked actually about how he'd be gone like in a few months. We did not expect a couple weeks, I don't think, at the time. And here we are, just a couple weeks later, and Forgiven is out. Your reaction to this news, just as it is?
Well, I think, you know, reading all the Facebook posts that Forgiven has posted during his time in H2K, he didn't really seem motivated to play at all in this particular split. And I was surprised that he joined a team like Origin. Very, very surprised, because he sent out so many signals and these kind of a vibe that he didn't want to play anymore and just go back to Greece. But instead, he joins Origin. And I think the match between him and Origin, it's very, very strange, because Forgiven is the type of person that likes to have this drive and push himself all the time. And Origin is the type of team that kind of go up and down all the time. They have this party phase or whatever you want to call it. And then all of a sudden, when playoffs come, they kind of play better and kind of push up. But I don't think that really applies now when Nils and Mithy is no longer involved, because I don't think Origin is going to have the same upswing. But Forgiven stated that he just doesn't have motivation, and I think if he doesn't have motivation, then we're not going to see the Forgiven we like to see. And I think in the end, this is going to be a good decision long term.
Now, we've seen Forgiven in a number of team jerseys as of late. I think we have a little showing here. Yeah, not a whole lot of consistency for Forgiven since leaving Copenhagen Wolves. He was there for about a year. Since then, you know, not quite so long a stay. Origin, of course, the 1 month was a new low in time spent with the team. Obviously, Forgiven has shown some great mechanical strength. He's been at times one of the best ADC in all of Europe, arguably a world class. As a coach, as a player manager, as a person in a team, how would you approach someone like Forgiven, who's shown this really difficult time sticking with one organization, with one group of teammates, but has shown as well great individual talent?
It's like I've had some conversations with Forgiven, and he has always interested me. I even had a plan myself if I stayed in Rokat. The previous split, I had a plan to acquire Forgiven because he was so intriguing, such a mechanical player, and I truly believe that any talent can be nurtured regardless of their personality. But we've reached a point where mechanically Forgiven is not as impressive as before. You're no longer going to have these performances when a player 1v5s and completely carries a game. That happened in the past. It happened in Season 3. It happened a little bit in Season 4, but it's not going to happen no more. And then you have to look at that element that separates the mechanically good players from the other players, because at this point, mechanically, everyone is so sound. And that is the team play factor. And that is something that Forgiven has always lacked, the team play factor, the ability to push his teammates and take a back seat and kind of give your teammates the opportunity to take over the game. And I think this has always been an issue for Forgiven. In the past, it worked because team play was really irrelevant. It was just, as a player, individually, how well can you do? Uzi carry games, Faker carry games, Forgiven carry games. But this is no longer the case. Team play is very, very important. The mechanical prowess of all the players in the LCS is very, very similar, around the top 3, top 5 level. And I think at this point in time, I think Forgiven is done.
Well, we'll find out, I guess, soon enough, because he might not spend too much time before getting to a new team. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. Speaking of mechanics, not a great solution potentially for Origin right now. expk moving into the ADC role for this team. Obviously, it's a temporary solution. I would hope a temporary solution. They're going to look for a new player there to slot into. But for the time being, is there any chance Origin can make way up standings and improve in their standings at all with expk filling that role?
You know, Origin, they are hilarious to me because, you know, expk, I think short term was probably the best solution because his map understanding is very, very good, but his mechanics were obviously horrible because there were moments where he flashed in, died, and lost Baron and eventually the game.
That's bad. Flashing in and dying is bad, generally.
That's unfortunate, yeah. Right? But I feel like, you know, Origin as a whole, I feel like it's like, you know, when you're a kid and your parents, they beat you at every game that you play, like 3 or 4. They beat you at every game you play. And all of a sudden, you know, you get older and then all of a sudden you beat them at every game. And I feel like EULCS has reached the point where we beat our parents, you know, at every game. Wow. And I think Origin, you know, their players, SOAS, amazing, expect they are the parents. And I feel like mechanically, they are very, very underwhelming. And now I'm looking at amazing SOAS and expect specifically, very, very underwhelming mechanically. And with that in mind, you know, their map decisions are very, very good. You know, when a player on the enemy team does a mistake, it gets punished and it gets punished hard. And that's how they got their wins. They were behind and all of a sudden there was a mistake, they punished it hard. And of course there was this one game where SOAS single-handedly carried with the Jax, which was impressive, but in reality how he got there was through a TP, which is a decision, and then split pushing and closing out the game is also something that comes down to decision making. So their map play is still very impressive. How they pressure the map after the enemy team does mistakes is fine, but can they create leads out of nothing? It cannot happen because mechanically this team is very underwhelming.
A team with better mechanics and a team that's beating their parents, figuratively speaking, would be G2 Esports, top of the table in Europe still. They did lose a game, we'll get to that, but first, they also had a roster change. Kikis is gone. Expect now, the Korean top laner, taking over. We've talked about how Kikis has been perhaps a weak link, if you will, in the G2 lineup. He's now no longer a link at all. He's replaced. Expect in his stead. Do you think this immediately strengthens G2 to have Kikis out of the lineup, or do they need more time to adjust to a new Korean top laner? What does this do to G2 in the immediate future, and then what does it do to them in the extended future, looking towards Worlds?
I think Kikis, based over the 4 games that he has played, or 4 games, I guess it makes it 8. I guess 7 in this case, because Expect subbed in for 1. I think he has shown great improvement. He mechanically is better overall. I think he has improved as a player, and that's why the decision, or his decision, came kind of shockingly to me, because it felt, the scenario and the statements that I've read was that it was made clear to him that there would be a 6-man roster. He agreed to it, and later down the line decided that it wasn't something that was for him. And I think, sure, it depends on player to player how they react to this, but I think in this type of case, these cases will appear more often and often, and these scenarios should motivate you, because we mentioned earlier with the C9 situation that organizations are going to expand their structure behind teams. This is going to happen often and more often and more often. You need to get used to it, bite the bullet, accept that there's competition for your job, and just work your ass off. And I think this was truly Kicker's chance to be on a top team that accomplishes something. G2 obviously are going to Worlds. I don't think there's any way around it. They're 100% going to Worlds, and I think he definitely missed his chance to do something great at Worlds, because I don't think he's going to ever join a team at the caliber of G2.
Well, to your point, in traditional sport, you always have players who have their roles being threatened by the younger lions, right? That's just a part of sport in general. As we see more infrastructure come in place with these teams, you're going to have more capacity for players who are challenging for those spots. So people like Kikis will have to get accustomed to it, as you mentioned. Now, Expect did not have a great showing initially. G2's one loss came to Rocat, who might have had some top lane advantage there. What do you think of Expect? Obviously, haven't seen a lot of him, I don't think, but with G2, can he improve? Will it take time? Is this a downgrade for them, perhaps?
I don't think it's too much of a downgrade. I've had the opportunity to see him play more, and I think the teamwork between Trick and Expect is very, very high level, comparable to the teamwork we see between Trick and Perks. And I think Expect I think he has a higher ceiling than Kikis, because mechanically he's very, very sound. And in the loss against Rocat, he still played very, very well. Questionable build path, because he went Blade of Rune King second. That's the only kind of negative thing I have to say about him. But in general, I think this game is kind of, just because they lost, I wouldn't put the blame on him. Because in reality, why they lost? Because they had a massive lead, threw it at a dragon because they refused to base before. There was a Cloud Drake that they kind of sacrificed everything for, You risk everything for nothing because Cloud Drake is useless. And in this particular fight, even though they were 6k gold ahead, didn't matter, because Azir was sitting on 4,000 gold and they were sitting on a bunch of money that is not effective unless you've actually spent it. It's not the real life where you kind of save up in a bank, and that's a comfortable situation. It doesn't work like that in League, sadly.
Let's talk about one more team, in addition to Origin, who are winless thus far. The only other team who are winless thus far in the EU LCS. That's Vitality, of course. Big names here: Cabochard, Nukeduck, Kasing, very big names. They brought in Mighty Bear, the Korean jungler, to try and plug in there. It has not worked out for them. We haven't really talked much about Vitality at all, I don't think, on the show. So with 2 weeks in the books for them and still no wins, again, only Origin equaling that feat in Europe, what do you think is missing the most for Vitality today?
I think it's very, very strange for me to see them in this type of shape, because I feel like they play to the level of their competition, which might sound strange, but that is how it is. I feel like depending on who they play against, they play better. Because, the game, we had a series against them, we went 1-1. I felt the series was very, very competitive, and I thought Vitality would continue with the same level throughout. They lost the first game. I felt like we almost caught them off guard. And then the second game, they realized, holy shit, they're actually okay. We need to do something. This is not the Splice from last split. And all of a sudden, they turned up their gears. So I feel like they play to the level of their competition. But it is very strange to me because, sure, I don't want to reveal too much about scrims, but in scrims, Vitality is one of the stronger teams. I love to scrim Vitality because it's always a challenge for us. And I think part of the issue is transferring that onto the stage. I think something that is also worth mentioning, I feel like their philosophy about the pick and ban is something that I disagree with. I think it's very outdated. They still play those tanks when I feel like they have this massive force in Cabochard where the meta is definitely in his favor. Sure, he played some Olaf, but I think they can push him even further into the carry role. Let him play that Olaf. I liked it. But let him play that Aurelia too. Let him play these very, very heavy carry-oriented top laners, because Cabochard is able to execute those very, very well. I remember seeing him on that Graves. Not a lot of people play Graves top, but when he did, he was a scary mother effer. And with that in mind, I think the idea of how Vitality play should be centered around Cabochard, and also their pick and ban needs some update. Because, we saw them picking that Lissandra. Sure, it was fine with Swain and Vladimir out of the picture and then stealing it away from Rokat. But I still feel like Lissandra is kind of outdated because a lot of these mages that have been buffed and are still seeing play are very good into Lissandra. Victor, for example, I think it's possibly the most picked mid lane in competitive throughout the split. And I think Victor is a very, very good pick into Lissandra. So I think that is also a weakness. But mainly, I would say the transition of scrim results into the stage is the bigger issue for them.
We should get a hashtag free Cabochard going, perhaps, to get Vitality back on track. Flipping now to the top of the table again, second place behind G2 is H2K. Now, H2K has been kind of a, I feel, under-the-radar team for some time in that they've been one of the best teams in Europe for a while now, and yet never really get the hype of a Fnatic or an Origin or even a G2 now, G2 and 8, if you will. So what is it about H2K that's gotten them to second place on the table, and do you think they can stay at that top tier range, or are they going to sag down in the long term as other teams below them figure things out?
I feel like H2K have been lucky. I don't want to say lucky, but they've played against a weaker field of competition so far, and I don't think H2K is the second best team in Europe. I think definitely they have some weaknesses. I think, for example, in lane swaps, I think H2K, the way they jungle is very too safe. There are junglers that take massive risks by taking the extra camp, and it pays off immensely if there is no punish. And nowadays, it's been kind of a norm to play it very, very greedy. And I think the CS differences that appear out of a lane swap is a worrying trend for H2K. And I think there are other issues too. I think specifically against Fnatic, they were kind of given the game on a silver platter because I think the Fnatic draft was horrible. They played Kha'Zix over and over, and they had no response to the Draven. I think against H2K, you ban Draven, you will suddenly see a much weaker bot lane. I think Freeze's efficiency after a Draven ban drops down immensely. And I think, in general against Fnatic, the hyped up Fnatic, they were just given the game because of a weak draft from Fnatic.
You mentioned Fnatic's draft, and I want to talk about Spirit in particular because he played Kha'Zix, not just those 2 games, but all 4 games in week 2 he played Kha'Zix. An interesting choice, in even one game, certainly an interesting choice in all 4 games consecutively. Can you explain, with your League of Legends expertise you have, Yamato, your coaching expertise, all the professional years you have in the game, what Spirit was going for with 4 consecutive Kha'Zix picks here?
It's like Kha'Zix is not that bad. I think the matchup into Lee Sin is just fine. The matchup into Nidalee is also very, very fine. I think against Kindred is horrible. It's bad against Rek'Sai too, but like Kha'Zix is a fine champion. I don't think right off the bat I would say, oh, they picked Kha'Zix, it's free lose. I think it's okay at best. And with that in mind, I think the reason why Kha'Zix was practiced a lot because they wanted to leave Nidalee open and bait the enemy team into picking it, but I feel like throughout this week, people have realized that Nidalee is rather weak after her nerfs, and there wasn't too much Nidalee being played at all. And I think that kind of makes Kha'Zix lose his value. I don't think we will see any Kha'Zix from Fnatic next week. Hopefully, because I play them, I hope to see a Kha'Zix, but it's definitely not the main losing factor behind Fnatic.
We may see 4 consecutive Kha'Zix picks in week 3. That would be pretty impressive, actually. So you think it's more of a counter pick? They couldn't counter because the counter they were picking into wasn't really there anymore?
Yeah, pretty much. I think there are other glaring issues in Fnatic's pick and ban. Like in this particular series against H2K, they really had no response to the Draven. They played Kalista and Sivir, 2 champions that are rather weak into Draven. They picked Nami support every game because Braum was banned. Nami support is fine blind pick, but I don't feel like Yellowstar has any impact on this champion because it does require some mechanical prowess. I think on anything besides Alistar, Braum, Janna, I'm not impressed by Yellowstar, and I think that is definitely an issue. And It's like when I think of Fnatic, the previous Fnatic we had, it's like you could argue about the pick and ban, you could blame Daylor potentially, but in the past, their best of five and how they play in best of fives has been very, very strong. It has been very, very good. I think the results speak for themselves. But when I think of the playoff run that Fnatic had this year, they did have the same thing going for them. They had one set strategy that they played over and over and over and over. And I feel like they're trying to achieve the same thing every single week. And I think they haven't really found their thing yet. I think Fnatic tried to be what SKT is by finding their own thing and they keep kind of playing the same way over and over because it's just efficient if you practice the same thing over and over and over and over again. But I don't think they have found that thing yet, because patches come in, things change. And I feel like in this split in particular, I feel like the meta is going to shift a lot. So I don't think this efficient way of practicing, as I like to call it, is going to be as efficient throughout the regular split, but is indeed very, very good coming into playoffs. So I think from Fnatic's point of view, I think their adaptation has always been something that is kind of worse because they try to play the same way all the time just because of efficiency in practice. But hopefully, in Fnatic's case, maybe they'll find a patch that doesn't change a lot and they can play the same way all the way. And then I think Fnatic is going to shine again.
By the way, what do you think about the Draven bottom lane right now?
It's like Draven is so cheesy. I think it's so cheesy because, nobody, if you practice a lot against Draven and you understand the damage numbers and you play a lot against it, then this champion is not going to be useful at all because it's very, very easy to punish. The pattern and the play pattern of Draven is very, very obvious. But if you aren't accustomed to it, if you aren't aware of it, then it can be very disgusting and awful and you'll get punished and you will lose your lane because all of a sudden he hits you for 600 damage because he has a Cloak of Agility and a BF Sword and a Yuma's Ghost Plate. Unfortunate, that happens. But I think the lack of experience around Draven is what makes him a strong pick. And in this case, Freeze has so much experience with Draven, so it's just a perfect lethal combination. You pick something that the enemies don't understand, but you understand that is indeed a lethal force.
Let's go to a couple of highlights now from the European region. We start with a clip you might have seen previously. I believe Splice was playing against Schalke, so this may be familiar to you, in fact, as you see an initiation that leads to a solid fight win for Splice.
All right. So this, Gilius, I have to say, he was trolling. This was Meteos level Gragas ult. He just jumped in and died and accomplished nothing. Kobe played it wonderfully by eating it away. But you could see our combination of AoE abilities was very, very poor because we used a Flash Victor ultimate on top of a Bard ultimate, which isn't that beautiful. But at this point in the game, when Caitlyn has 3 items and she has a red buff and a Baron buff, she can just clean up very, very easily. Kobe, the only kind of hard thing he had to do in this fight was Eing when Gragas jumped into 5 people and died. And overall, after that, it was basically out-attack City.
Well, I think your team did a great job. Yeah, I think they did a great job, Yamato.
It could have been better. Because we missed so much damage on the Victor ultimate because we did it on top of the Bard ultimate, some mixed communication. Could have been more pretty because we were in such a dominant position. I think the gold advantage kind of carried us in this fight.
Spoken like a true coach, I would say. Like a true coach. Now we have one more here from Europe, G2 versus Rocket, I believe, and we've got some chaos around the Dragon, as is often the case in League of Legends. Even at the pro level, happens sometimes.
Yes. I think in this particular case, you could see glaring gold advantage, 40k, 6k gold advantage. But the problem here is there is, they didn't base yet. You have Aurelia with uncompleted item. You sure Ezreal have base, but Azir didn't base either, and the chunk of gold is on Azir. Victor died early on in the fight, but Azir started the fight very, very low. They were stuck in the pit, and they managed to kill the Rek'Sai before there was a response from, of course, G2. And I think this fight was a massive throw, because they did it for a Cloud Drake. Cloud Drake, we've talked about Cloud Drake. This is a useless dragon, you know. You shouldn't take any risks. Perks gets chunked out by Betsy here in the start. And, you know, overall, I think they should have just based, given up Cloud Drake, and there you go. You're still in a winning position. No risk. Don't take fights when you have a lot of money, because that money that is an advantage is going to matter. Rek'Sai died for no reason here. And all of a sudden you have Steel back in a very, very good position. They tried to chase onto him. Airwax is peeling very, very well. I think Rokat did play this fight very, very well and impressively. But the bigger issue for me is the fact that G2, bunch of moolah, didn't use it. Unlucky.
Always unlucky, especially if you go after a bad Drake. That's when you become unlucky, actually, is if you commit for a bad Drake. That is the secret. Let's talk a bit about the latest patch and the new meta coming into season here. You mentioned Azir. We saw him in this clip. He is perhaps going to be a little less common in the future. Got hit by the nerf bat, I've heard. What do you think about these changes to him, and do you see him sticking around because of his utility, even with the nerfs incoming?
I think the nerf is a healthy nerf, but definitely, you know, even in this game that was highlighted, the Azir had already been nerfed. So I don't think he's going to see less play because of his ult nerf, but I think the bigger nerf is the fact that Stinger is a weaker item, and I think Stinger used to be such a big power spike for Azir because of the lane presence, and I think there are a lot of champions that are receiving buffs that are overtaking him. I think those are the bigger nerfs to Azir. Victor received a rework per se, and is a stronger version of what Azir wants to be, like a mid lane control mage, which just chills around in mid. But it's also important to highlight that the AD carry pool that Azir is good against is starting to fade out. We see Ashe, we see Caitlyn. These champions are very long range, good against Azir. We used to see a lot of Lucian, a lot of Sivir. That is where Azir shines, against these low range AD carries. And as the meta transitions, you know, we can see this Irelia, these Olafs, they're also good into Azir. All things that can collapse onto him and shoot at him from long range is perfect against Azir. And as we see, you know, there is going to be a time where Azir is going to shine again, but now is not his time.
We did speak of Lucian already in the show, talking about him becoming a less common pick. He was, for a time, an automatic pick or ban. Now not so much. Do you think he's still got any relevance left, or is it only when Doublelift picks him?
I think, you know, Lucian definitely has a more defined role. I think when teams are drafted in a specific way, I'm going to just... I had a reason to why I drafted in a specific game. I'm just going to pull that up real quick.
Please do. We want to hear.
One moment. There we go. We drafted it against G2 in the second game. So they had Vladimir, Gragas, Sivir. In this case, you don't really want to play... Like, Caitlyn was also banned this game, so you don't want to play Ashe into this, because obviously Gragas and Vladimir is horrible because they can pull the ultimate, and Gragas is something that is very tough to handle. In these cases, when you need an AD carry that can jump around and do a lot of crazy shit like a ninja, then Lucian is perfect for it. When you just need an AD carry that can kind of handle himself when Caitlyn is out of the picture. But I feel like Lucian, definitely, with the fact that he's weaker in lane against, for example, Caitlyn, the Q nerf range is massive. I think Lucian definitely is going to see less and less play, because in my eyes, Caitlyn is the top dog of AD carries. The counter to Caitlyn is Ashe, and it goes around in a circle like that. Sivir can get thrown in there, Ezreal sometimes. This is the holy kind of square of AD carries right now, and I don't think Lucian fits into that frame just yet. These nerfs were very hard and very well deserved, in my opinion.
You mentioned Lucian now looking like he's in the niche of a mobility ADC for times when that's called for. Going to the top lane, we've seen, as you also mentioned, Olaf. We've seen Irelia coming back into the mix, and our old friend Irelia getting back into the top lane mix. And now Illaoi, the new... not that new anymore, but she seems new because we've not really seen her in the pro level a whole lot getting involved. Do you see Illaoi as a really viable top lane champion moving forward?
Well, we picked it ourselves in the first game against G2. I think Illaoi definitely has a place in the meta because she does very well into these melee champions that are starting to appear. Something that is very important to note as well is the fact that Illaoi has been receiving buffs almost every single patch.
Yeah.
I haven't really been reading it too much until like I did it the past week, but it's just a bunch of text about how the tentacles work and here and there, and it's improved and the hitboxes is better, blah blah, a bunch of stuff every patch. And she finally reached the point where she's very, very strong. The percentage health damage in W, perfect against these tanks that people like to play. Very, very good in general on a top laner to have percentage health damage, because a lot of these top laners love to buy a bunch of health because of Grasp with the Undying. So I think Illaoi with her recent buffs definitely is a viable champion. Her weaknesses though is that her TP is rather weak, because if she can't reach anything, she's rather useless. I think Illaoi's role in a team fulfills the same role Darius did at the Worlds patch, where if you walk into him, he can do disgusting things and kill your entire team. If he gets kited and he just doesn't touch anything, he's completely useless and garbage. And I think Illaoi fits the same frame. Something that is important to notice though, Illaoi in a split push against melee champions is very, very strong. So that is still a win condition for Illaoi if you don't want to teamfight.
One last note for tonight before we sign off. We have not spoken about the queue issues, and which are prevalent, we should say. Some of the pro players have spoken out about solo queue being a problem now for practice, having to use custom queues, if you will. What do you think about this whole dynamic queue issue with pro players having to think about how to get the best practice? Like, where do you fall in this whole thing?
Well, I think it's, my players are complaining constantly about the queue times. Like, sometimes they are amazed by how good it is, but sometimes, for example, Trashy tells me that he gets autofill and has to play support for an entire day, and I can see him tear up a bit because he doesn't get to jungle. And I think the entire system is very chaotic. I don't think, personally, I might sound biased because I played the most during these days, but I like the old system more, because you had this kind of rotation of 3 games going on at the same time at the highest level. The top dogs, let's say there are 200 people top of the ladder that were part of these games. They play at different hours, but usually there were like 3-4 games, and you had to wait until one of these games ended, and you were kind of in the rotation all the time. In the rotation, you played one game, queued up for another, then you were still in this kind of rotation where everyone just played against the same people all the time. And I loved that. The queue times were long the first time you queued, but otherwise it wasn't. I'm not too deep into what is going on behind the scenes or the algorithms or whatever, but something is obviously horrible.
There you go, the official Beyond the Lane take on dynamic queue. It's horrible. Not a big hot take there. It's pretty common sentiment, I think, in this League of Legends scene.
It's just so strange to me. Like, the one thing that has been an issue is the fact that there is a bunch of elo boosters as well taking over the ladder. I think that is a massive issue. I can see a lot of these names and a lot of players, they are elo boosted up to top of the ladder, and all of a sudden, the pool of players in the top 200 is going to be smaller and less people are going to queue, and that is going to be an issue.
Yeah, it is. Dynamic queue got some problems with it, but I'm sure Riot's going to fix it all up in no time. So no worries, no problem. All the math and algorithms and complicated calculus that goes into it, taken care of by tomorrow, I bet. New patch. On that note, on the note of us promising dynamic queue will get fixed, I want to say good night to all of you for watching. Thank you for all of you for watching as well, and good night, of course, to YamatoCannon, my wonderful co-host on the show. We'll see you next week with a recap of next week's games and more look towards the future of the LCS. Thanks for watching again. Same time next week on the same channel.